Hey guys, welcome back to the garage. This week I'm taking on the part of the disassembly that I've looked forward to the least. I'm finally going to remove the dash and the wiring on this car, something that I've been dreading because I don't know anything, and I mean that quite literally. I don't know anything about what lies between the firewall and the dash. But let's first get started with the steering wheel and the steering column. Removing a few screws from the bottom will remove both the bottom and the top plastic covers wrapping the steering column. And here's a shot of all of the electronic stuff around the steering column, and it does look awfully complicated. And to be fair, there is a lot going on here, including the switches for the signal lights, wiper, lights, horn, windshield fluid, and of course the ignition switch. And I'm not all that worried about figuring out all the details here, since I do expect to relocate a lot of the switches to other parts of the dash, but let's not worry about that for now. You now have access to two bolts that hold the column in place, and once you remove those, you should start to feel the column wiggle a little bit. And after that, there are 4 more bolts to the firewall behind the pedal where the steering column goes to the firewall. And the last thing you have to do is to disconnect the column from the steering rack, which you can do at the first U-joint. Turn the steering wheel if you have to get easy access to the 2 bolts, but after that you're free to pull out the steering wheel and the column out of the car. Actually, I forgot to mention, you have to unplug a whole bunch of wiring before you can completely pull out the steering column. And I'm going to be saying this a lot from here on out. Take plenty of pictures and use masking tape to label plugs and wires if you're expecting to put everything back together. Strap a GoPro to your head, sketch some drawings, use Polaroid pictures, do whatever you have to do because this chassis wiring is a doozy. All of this stuff is in actually pretty decent shape. Again, I guess it doesn't matter because I don't plan on reinstalling wipers or the windshield fluid reservoir, and I'm planning to use a switch panel for all the lights and the ignition, so I don't know how much of all of this stuff I'm keeping. Probably just a turn signal light switch. Next to go are some air vents and some lights. This probably isn't coming back either, since I think this is where my switch panel is going. Also, you don't need air vents if you can't afford to install air conditioning. That's me. I won't be driving this car in the extreme cold or heat anyway. And let's move towards the windshield now. And I don't know exactly what this panel is called, but there is actually a thin strip of metal panel that runs along the windshield, underneath which you will find the bolts that you'll need to remove for the dash. And the metal panel is held in by a few screws, pretty easy to remove. So we have just a little bit more work to do before we can remove the dash. There is a plastic panel on the passenger side underneath the glove compartment that you need to remove, which will reveal a whole mess of wires, especially if you own a 280Z. And there's a little pull handle to open up the vent, which you can free up to give yourself a little bit more space. So now you should have access to all of the bolts that hold the dash in place. And there are 4 bolts near the center console, 2 on each side. There are 2 more bolts closer to the doors, 1 on each side. And then there are 6 more bolts on the top running across the windshield. After all the bolts are removed, it does take a little bit of wiggling to loosen the dash, but don't force anything too hard, and keep checking for other minor screws and bolts that you may have missed. And remember, the dash is still connected by the speedometer cable and some other harness plugs, so don't manhandle this, take your time. So with some help from my dad, who's visiting for a few weeks, I was able to get the dash removed. Honestly, it was easier than I thought it was going to be. Restoring all the cracks and replacing all the gauges and getting them to work again may be a different story, but hey, pretty easy for now. Next up is the ECU removal, and there's nothing too hard here either. Just remove the plastic cover, unplug and unbolt the ECU, and slide it out. That's it. Now we're going to remove the pedal assembly, which is pretty straightforward if you know how it works. The pedal assembly is really just for the two left pedals, the clutch pedal and the brake pedal. Both of these pedals are connected to something on the other side of the firewall, namely the brake booster and the clutch master cylinder. You'll need to disconnect them both before you can pull out the pedal assembly, and all of the bolts are easily visible and intuitive, so I won't bother locating them for you. Alright, from here on out, this is where it gets awfully complicated awfully quickly. I'll just time-lapse my progress here without much detailed comments, since there are a ton of differences between the different models of the S30 in terms of what's going on behind the dash. But also, I honestly am not qualified to explain anything back here, and I'm just personally rushing through the disassembly. But if you are looking to restore your Z back to original, take all the time you need here labeling and taking pictures, and again, do whatever it is that you need to do to remember how to put this all back together. For me, I've already accepted the fact that I'm not putting everything back. In fact, I won't be putting most stuff back. Air conditioning and heating components will be removed along with the radio. Most, if not all, gauges will be replaced, and even the ignition cylinder will probably be replaced with a ignition switch panel. I doubt I'll be using the old chassis harness at all, so I'm labeling a few things, but I'm more or less rushing through the disassembly because I don't really think it'll be relevant. Also, I'm not capable of making all of this complicated stuff work again like new, so if I want some of the stuff back like a stereo, I'll just buy one and install it back later. And speaking of the chassis harness, at least to my very novice eyes, it's crazy complicated with all kinds of outdated relays, fuses, switches, and to make things a lot worse, a lot of botched wiring job from previous owners. And I feel kind of okay right now because I've had a few nights of sleep accepting the fact that I'll have to rewire this car from scratch anyway. But I gotta tell you guys, I nearly had a panic attack and regretted even starting this project while I was messing with all the wiring. So following the chassis wiring harness from the front of the Z to the back, you can start to disconnect everything that it connects to, including the seatbelt clips and any connections in the back of the car, for me most of which were already disconnected from previous weeks of work. And this pile of a harness is what freaks out most novice mechanics, including myself. You know, if I were to put my mind to it and take days, if not weeks, tracing every wire and line referring to the wiring diagram, yeah, I'm sure I could figure it out. But I actually think it'd be much more efficient and reliable to just discard this pile of crap and rewire the car with much more modern fuses, relays, and switches. And yeah, that's easier said than done though. I do have a lot of studying to do to learn proper automotive electrical techniques. Now that I'm more or less done with the mess in the front, I'm moving back to the back of the car, removing seatbelts and speakers and stuff like that. These seatbelts are in really bad shape and they get stuck really easily, so I may have to find a replacement seatbelt. The body panels are held in either by screws or plastic push pins, and if it's a plastic push pin, just use a thin screwdriver to punch out the middle and wiggle the whole thing out. Once you remove the rear panel near the windows, you can get access to the speaker. And I actually don't know if all S30s came with this stereo system or if this was another kind of a dealer installed option. The vinyl wrap that's glued to the rear wheel well and the suspension tower is actually in pretty good shape, but it has to be removed anyway. And it was really easy to remove. I guess 40-year-old glue doesn't work that well anymore, and also I was pleasantly surprised to find pristine sheet metal underneath, at least on the inside. I guess once I grind down the undercoating from the outside, my opinion may change, but at least I didn't notice any rust that had eaten all the way through. I'm kind of wondering how bad it would look if I didn't reinstall any of these panels and instead just painted the inside with something like the lizard skin. I really dislike these plastic panels. They're brittle, bent out of shape, and they squeak all the time. I will keep the panels around though, if only to use them as templates for something else later on. Alright, that's pretty much it for this week, but before you leave, I do have a favor to ask you. If you liked my content, if you found any of this helpful, or for whatever reason even entertaining, please do subscribe, like the video, or just leave a comment. If you feel extra generous, I do have a GoFundMe page where you can support me and the project, and it would mean a lot to me. And speaking of which, let's get to our weekly GoFundMe shoutouts. So I'm actually shooting this like a week after I shot the week 6 video, so you guys can kind of see a sneak preview of what's to come in the next episode. Anyway, first of all, thank you to Rob Hosak, aka Rob4812. Thanks for your $25 donation. Really appreciate it. Glad you're enjoying the new series, and best of luck to your own 240Z. And the next one is Mr. J, who also donated $25. Thank you so much. Don't know much about you, but thanks for the support. And as for everyone else, as always, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys are enjoying this rebuild process. In the next couple of weeks, we are going to transition from the disassembly phase to actually doing something productive phase. We gotta break everything down before we build it back up, but I'm really excited to get to the build back up phase. In the next couple of weeks, I am expecting to take delivery of the new engine. It's not a brand new engine, but it's a new to me engine. I will keep it a mystery as to what exactly the engine is, unless I've been talking to you personally about it. But that should be really exciting. And even before we tackle everything on the frame and the body that really needs to be addressed before everything can be built back up, I think I am going to try to get the new engine in there and try to get it to run and try to mock things up with all of the new drivetrain in before I take it back out and get back to just cleaning everything up and fixing up all the rust and all of the other issues. So really excited about that. I hope you guys will stick with me, and I will see you guys next week.